Hey guys, tonight we step onto cracked, sun-baked stones laid down by traders millennia ago, where every footfall kicks up a swirl of ancient dust and distant camels bray their morning grievances. You inhale the sharp scent of spices, mingled with sweat, and the warming breeze teases your hair as the horizon blushes with dawn. The courtyard bustles with merchants unrolling tapestries, bargaining over bolts of silk woven in Chang'an, and you probably won't survive this trek if you think of it as a luxury vacation. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the chat so we know where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step across the threshold of the caravanserai. You trudge from a bustling caravanserai at dawn, excitement mingling with dread as the desert yawns before you. The courtyard's stony floor is pocked with ancient indentations, proof that for over 2,000 years, foot traffic has ground down these stones into smooth, palm-worn grooves. Mainstream scholars note that the Silk Road network first flourished under the Han Dynasty around 130 BCE, linking Chang'an, modern Xi'an, to distant outposts in Central Asia and beyond. Historians still argue whether private nomads or imperial envoys truly inaugurated the earliest silk shipments. But everyone agrees that the trade routes reshaped civilizations. A half-dozen camels stand tethered to wooden posts, their humps swaying as they chew cud with slow deliberation. One particularly stubborn fellow yawns so wide you glimpse a crooked tooth, charmingly human in its indifference to your rival. A fringe rumor says that in ancient times, caravan leaders used dried crocodile dung as sunscreen. You can't make this stuff up, though most traders preferred simple cloth wraps. You fiddle with your own headscarf, wondering if it's doing much beyond making you look like you're auditioning for a desert music video. A merchant from Samarkand waves you over, calling out in a blend of Persian and broken Turkish, offering saffron and pomegranates. You nod, bargaining in your spottiest phrasebook, Bi Zaban e Manuksh. You're acutely aware that courtesy can mask confusion, a cultural tangle you'll revisit with every handshake and every coin you palm over. A stray cat darts between barrels of dates. You laugh at how even felines here know opportunity when they smell it. The desert air is already warming, and your lips crack against the dryness. You remember that later, when the noon sun feels like a blowtorch, you'll curse your over-enthusiasm for fashionable turbans. But in this moment, swirling dust and hesitant laughter mingle, giving everything a romantic sheen. A lanky guide adjusts your pack. He warns you with a half-smile that if you forget to tie your water skin properly, you'll spend the next 2 days drinking sand. Joke's on you. Your boots already have more sand than your neighbor's hourglass collection. Each crate of goods is stamped with strange symbols, Chinese characters, Greek letters, Aramaic etchings. This corridor of cultures once ferried not just silk and spices, but religion's ideas, and perhaps the very concept of zero from India. You tug at a loose seam on your satchel, wishing you'd packed an extra bit of rope. Supplies are precious here. 1 liter of water per person per day was the historical norm, though desperate traders sometimes boiled animal milk to eke out an extra mouthful. You cringe at the memory of a camel's late-night burp sounding like a wounded horn comforting in its own twisted way. A gentle breeze wafts through an open archway carrying the distant jangle of lanterns being lit in mosques. The muezzin's call will echo across dunes by midday, signaling not just prayer time, but also a brief reprieve from relentless travel. You slip on gloves against the coarse ropes that bind supplies. Little things like that can turn into blistered regrets if you're not careful. As you step past the last stone pillar, the caravanserai's walls slump into the distance and you're greeted by a sea of beige. The desert truly yawns now, stretching in every direction without promise of shade or salvation. A lone hawk circles overhead, its keen eyes seeking any movement, perhaps a scorpion scuttling beneath a rock, or more worryingly, an unwary traveler like yourself. You swallow a swallow of water, testing its cool clarity, and remind yourself that this journey covers more than 4,000 miles of shifting terrain. Camel caravans once averaged a mere 25 miles per day. At that pace, exhaustion is practically guaranteed. A sudden gust lifts a veil of dust, momentarily transforming the horizon into an impressionist painting of reds and golds. You squint, then laugh at how the desert likes to toy with you just when you think you see an oasis. You realize it's another sand dune mocking your hope. Fringe whispers say that some caravans carried silkworm eggs and hollow bamboo to keep the trade monopoly. Obscure, yes, but it shows that even back then, people schemed for an edge. You tuck that in your mental pocket for later, when you boast of obscure trivia around campfires. One last look back at the caravanserai with its squat towers and clanking doors, and you realize this is the point of no return, no ends for miles, only campfire sparks and starlit prayers. You heft your pack higher, feeling the comforting weight of your modest provisions. A light joke crosses your mind, at least if you don't make it. You can't blame me, I clearly warned you. And so, with sand swirling around your ankles, you step into the void. You shoulder your pack and fall in step with a motley caravan winding its way into the ochre dawn. A dozen laden camels plod ahead, each beast clinking harness bells like a sleepy wind chime, while half a dozen traders, wrapped in woolen cloaks of varying hues, jockey for position beside you. Mainstream records show that typical Silk Road caravans numbered anywhere from 50 to 200 camels, depending on season and political stability, with larger convoys often under official imperial escort to deter bandits. Historians still argue whether private merchants or state-sponsored envoys first pioneered long-haul trade, but either way, you're part of a lineage stretching back 2 millennia. Your companion to the left is an elderly spice merchant who hums to himself as he adjusts wicker baskets brimming with cardamom pods. To your right, a young silk weaver from Dunhuang keeps an eye on her precious bolts, each fold echoing the legacy of Tang Dynasty artisans. You learn that she carries a portable chess set carved from camel bone, an odd luxury. But rumor has it that bored traders once gambled entire fortunes over a single pawn. You smile, wondering if you'll ever master those intricate moves or simply resort to flipping the board when you lose. By mid-morning, the sun has climbed high enough to scorch unprotected skin, and you pause in the shade of twin dunes to share hardtack and dates. You sip lukewarm water from a goatskin flask, an archaic vessel that leaks more often than not, while the weaver practices her chess gambits against the wind. Historians still debate whether Silk Road travelers actually dined on such meager rations, or if occasional feasts of roast mutton and fresh bread were the norm. But your empty belly doesn't care about scholarly disputes. A stray camel grunt sounds like a disgruntled uncle at family dinner, and you joke that if this trek kills you, at least you'll die of indigestion rather than boredom. As you resume walking, you fall into step with a guide from Kashgar, whose reputation precedes him, known for navigating by stars, and for carrying a live falcon perched on his wrist for hunting scorpions and snakes. Fringe whispers claim he once used a trained mongoose to root out hidden bandits under thorny bushes, though most caravaneers dismiss that as tall tale. You offer him a piece of jerky, and he hands over a battered tin flask of tea that smells faintly of goat hair, a feature you choose to ignore. You remind yourself to smile politely rather than gag. Camel scent is one thing, but fermented tea is another. Each dusk as firewood crackles and fellow travelers recite prayers in Arabic Sogdian, and surprisingly some archaic Greek, you sense a fragile camaraderie forming. Despite language barriers, your fragmented phrasebook leaps between Persian scripts and Turkic gutturals. You and the spice merchant exchange jokes about who has the most blistered feet. He claims that only a fool trusts a camel more than a friend. You retort that a camel at least won't steal your last date when you nod off. Laughter drifts across the camp, mingling with smoke and the scent of simmering stew. Night watch is a ritual. 2 volunteers take turns patrolling the perimeter, lantern in hand, listening for rustles of scorpion or shouts from suspicious travelers. You volunteer once, gripping a wooden staff that feels ludicrously inadequate. Mainstream accounts mention that caravan guards sometimes carried early firearms hand cannons packed with gunpowder, though historians still argue whether these were effective deterrents or more akin to noisy party favors. In your hand, the staff feels slightly more reassuring than nothing at all. When your turn ends, you collapse beside a flickering flame, wrap yourself in a woolen blanket, and gaze at constellations unfamiliar to any atlas you studied. The guide points out the Great Bear, but insists that in these latitudes it's called the Camel's Hump. Fringe lore suggests that Silk Road traders invented secret signals, like 4 flickers of lamp in the window, to warn passing caravans of lurking bandits, a practice some tribesmen still observe in remote oases. You nod, wondering if you should arrange your own coded Morse sequence for caffeine emergencies. Throughout these days, you forge bonds as precarious as the shifting sands. The weaver who offers you silk ties as makeshift bandages when your fingers blister, the spice merchant who shares cracked raisins when your hardtack grows stale, and even the camel you've nicknamed Bertha, whose stubborn halts prompt you to unleash a torrent of gentle threats. Move it! Bertha, that sound more like pleadings. A light joke flitters through your mind. If Bertha ever writes her memoirs, she'll dedicate an entire chapter to your profanity-laced pep talks. Yet trust remains conditional. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen anecdote, proof that caravan life could devolve into creative desperation. A single misstep, one spilled water skin, One argument over price could fracture your circle. Still, for now, you trek onward as one unit, human and beast, interwoven, bound by shared hardship and the tantalizing promise of riches awaiting in Samarkand, Bukhara, or far-off Khotan. And so, shoulder to shoulder with your ragtag band, you step deeper into the desert's embrace, each creaking camel step echoing your own racing heartbeat. You march onward under a cloudless sky, muscles already humming from yesterday's exertions, when without warning the air thickens into a living wall of dust. One moment you're squinting at the horizon, the next a roaring gust sweeps across the desert and you're choking on grit. You wrestle through a sudden storm, grit in your teeth and doubt in your mind as the caravan transforms into a beehive of frantic activity. The lead camel, Bertha, lowers her head and presses against the guide's robes for stability, while traders scramble to lash down packs and hide precious silks beneath coarse blankets. Mainstream travelers on the Silk Road routinely faced ferocious sandstorms, often called haboobs, capable of stalling convoys for days and claiming lives when water ran out. Your first instinct is to drop everything and seek refuge behind the nearest dune crest. But the guide's sharp voice cuts through the howling wind. Stick close, protect your face, and keep moving toward the white flag. You pivot on sandy knees, securing your headscarf over your mouth like a makeshift mask. Sand spray scours your cheeks, scratches your eyelids, and feels for all the world like taking a mouthful of spiced talcum powder. You taste iron on your tongue, wonder if you'll ever taste saffron again without crunchy surprises. A joke flits through your mind. At least this beats portable goat hair tea for flavor surprises. You hunker behind a low-lying camel saddle heart, thudding. The storm's roar crescendos into something resembling a galloping herd of horses with hooves of trombones. In the biblical city of Merv, records mention storms so intense that traders parked their beasts and dug shallow pits to wait it out, sometimes using camel hides to waterproof their shelters. Historians still argue whether caravans timed departures to avoid seasonal storms or merely accepted them as unavoidable hazards. You eye your falcon-wielding guide today. His falcon perches inside a leather hood, muffled and indignant, remarking that even the bird seems to question the wisdom of human travel. Lightning flickers beyond the curtain of sand. It's not thunder you hear, but the distant rattle of leather and bells as camels strain against their tethers. Your fingertips, numb with cold from clenching reins, slip on the ropes as you try to steady a pile of fragile parchment scrolls. You stab at the ground with your staff, each strike sending plumes of fine dust into swirling vortices. The world reduces to sepia tones, brown, darker brown, and occasional shimmering gold, when a gust hits just right. A fringe rumor circulates that ancient Silk Road traders sometimes carried dried fish to mask the scent of their provisions, and confused desert jackals, they swore by its effectiveness, though few practical travelers ever admitted to camping beside rancid cod during a storm. You wrinkle your nose, certain you can taste that fish after swallowing the desert's abrasive seasoning. Another joke pings your weary brain. If you ever become a guide, your packing list will include toothpaste stronger than a sandblaster, Visibility drops to mere arm's length. You find yourself brushing against a fellow merchant's cloak, muttering apologies you can't hear. In this chaos, you recall that Marco Polo's party once lost their way in a sandstorm so fierce that they stumbled into an abandoned fortress at night, believing it a mirage. There they sheltered among crumbling walls until dawn. Whether Polo's account is embellishment or accurate travelogue remains a subject of scholarly debate, but you treat it as cautionary lore more reliable than any desert horoscope. Your throat tightens, you gulp lungfuls of sand-laden air. Every breath feels like inhaling blistering embers. You try to choke out a laugh when the spice merchant next to you coughs so violently his basket of cardamom trembles, sending a few pods bouncing across the dunes. You snatch one up and pop it into your mouth. Its cooling heat cuts through the desert's fury for a nanosecond before you realize you've just eaten sand-tinged spice. You spit it out with theatrical flair, grateful that at least your sense of drama remains intact. The guide shouts, "Move," and you obey, stepping on instinct more than sight. Camels line up single file, their massive silhouettes reminding you of a surreal camel train stampede. The caravaneers murmur prayers in Arabic Sogdian and Persian chants you half recognize from last night's campfire. You join softly, hoping divine intervention includes less sand in your mouth. The muezzin's distant echo, sometimes heard even during storms, was a reminder that prayer could be as essential as water here. After what feels like an eternity measured in heartbeats, the storm's force begins to wane. The wind shifts, starlight flickering through thinning clouds of dust. You blink, the world returning, in ghostly outlines, camels shaking their humps, traders spitting handfuls of sand, and the guide pointing toward a narrow gorge carved by ancient floods. Travelers historically sought these defiles for shelter, trusting the canyon's walls to break the storm's back. However, historians still debate whether some routes through gorges were more dangerous, prone to flash floods or avalanche-like walls of sand, than the open desert itself. You strain to keep pace, knees jelly from exertion. The gorge entrance looms promising respite. Tentatively, you step beneath the rocky arch, where wind dies in a muffled hiss. The chill of shade feels like diving into a mountain stream so welcome that for a moment you can't speak. Camels file in kneeling like obedient steeds. You pat Bertha's neck, whispering apologies for your earlier threats. She snorts sand, tumbling from her lashes, as if to say, next time solve your own navigational crises. Once inside, the guide erects a canvas windbreak. Traders crowd together, sharing what little warmth they can muster. You sit on a flat stone, brushing out sand like a 6-year-old at the beach. A stray tuft of your hair, previously braided, now floats loose, dusted wide. You laugh softly. This is your life now, equal parts hazard and comedy routine. Beneath the rocky overhang, someone lights a lantern. Its yellow flame dances across uneasy faces. You notice the chess-playing weaver across the group today. Her board pieces are buried in grit, yet she arranges them with determined precision. You offer your goatskin flask again. She sips, slowly nods approvingly that at least the sand isn't fermented. By late afternoon, the storm has moved on like a disgruntled guest. Beyond the gorge mouth, the dunes sit calm, almost innocent in their silky sheen. You step back into blinding light, and stretch achy limbs. The guide hefts his falcon back onto his wrist. You squint as the bird shakes out its feathers, looking ready to attack the next sand particle. You dust off your clothes, but know that every grain will remain until you reach a river crossing miles ahead. You exchange weary smiles with fellow survivors, the spice merchant, the chess weaver, even a silent guard clutching his charred staff. Bonds forged in storm are stronger than any silk in your pack. Joke 3, if friendship here were traded like silk, you'd be the richest traveler alive. Your heart pounds, not just from exertion, but from exhilaration. You survived the storm. Yet you remember that this was but one of countless hazards on the Silk Road. A single miscalculation, ignoring a guide's warning, or underestimating the desert's mood could turn triumph into tragedy. As you and the caravan emerge from the gorge, the desert stretches ahead once more, indifferent and immense. You crest a sun-baked ridge and pause as the caravan below slows to a halt, a ripple of tension passing through the line of camels. Down in the valley, half hidden by rocky outcrops, you glimpse cloaked figures, perched like vultures, their silhouettes jagged against the evening sky. You know in an instant that these aren't local shepherds or wandering monks. They're bandits waiting to decide whether you're worth robbing or ransoming. You debate whether a bribe or a blade will save you. The spice merchant beside you gulps, clutching his pouch of silver coins. Mainstream accounts note that banditry along the Silk Road was so common that some rulers imposed extra tolls for security fees, effectively legalizing highway robbery under different names. Historians still argue whether these fees funded genuine protection or simply lined corrupt officials' pockets. You swallow hard, your throat dry, wishing you'd invested in a more diplomatic phrase book. You tie your scarf tighter, tasting the tang of fear mixed with dust. The guide signals you to stay low, pressing you against the sun-warmed stone. The wind stirs, carrying the faint jingle of bells from your own camels, reminding you that even beasts sense danger. You force a sarcastic thought. At least these bandits are courteous enough to wait for a summit, rather than charging uphill after you. Joke 1, if only you could charge them a parking fee for their impromptu ambush. From the edge of the ridge, a grizzled man steps forward, his face half hidden by a tattered veil. He raises an arm and signals for your caravan to stop. Below, camels huddled together, groaning in confusion. The weaver you met earlier grips her chest set like a weapon. You wonder if she's tempted to lob a knight at the nearest bandit. Fringe rumors claim that some Silk Road outlaws disguise themselves as monks or merchants only to pull blades once caravans disarmed. Whether true or clever scare tactic remains up for debate around campfires. You catch the spice merchant's eye and nod to the guide. He strides forward, staff in hand, offering a sealed box of saffron, the region's liquid gold, as tribute. The bandit leader sniffs it, and you half expect him to break into a cooking show review. Instead, he nods, once tucks the box beneath his cloak, and waves a crooked knife. It's a wordless negotiation, saffron for safe passage. You exhale, realizing that a bribe is far cheaper than a skirmish. Behind you, the younger silk weaver rolls her eyes. You're bribing them with the same spice they grow. She hisses in your ear, clearly unimpressed. You retort silently that beating them in a sword fight might cost even more in bribes. Later joke too. At least your bank account stays intact. As the bandits vanish back into rocky folds, the caravan exhales collectively, and camels release nervous squeals. The guide shrugs, as if this is all in a day's work. You suspect some caravaneers tallied bandit encounters like Pokemon, gotta bribe them all. Night settles quickly in these parts, and you set up camp farther down the trail, each lantern flame flickering with caution. Flames dance over wary faces. Some traders grip knives, others clutch prayer beads. Mainstream travelers recorded that successful ambushes could net bandits goods worth hundreds of dirhams. Caravans often traveled in even larger groups to deter lone raiders. Historians still argue whether larger convoys truly reduced attacks or only prompted bandits to form bigger gangs. You tighten the straps on your water skin and hope you never find out. As campfire embers glow, the crackling chorus seems alive with anxiety. The falcon guide removes his hood and lets his bird stalk the perimeter, talons clicking on stone. Fringe lore holds that some merchants carried jars of vipers as mobile defense, surely a tempting plot twist if you accidentally set the jar down. You chuckle softly, imagining a bandit's surprise when out pops a snake. That's a twist I didn't see coming. Joke 3, you resolve to carry extra nothing just to avoid awkward animal lawsuits. The caravan's cook ladles thin stew into chipped bowls, and you take a tentative spoonful. The flavors of bleak monotony, boiled grain, and watered-down goat broth, but after a day's stress, any warmth tastes like victory. You catch the chess weaver eyeing your portion. You slide your bowl across the low rock to her. She smiles bruised pawns from earlier games, scattered by wind, and murmurs thanks in a soft accent. Under the canvas of stars, you consider how fragile your safety is. One lost saffron box, one misread signal, and you'd be negotiating a different tribute, perhaps your own belt, your satchel, or one of the guide's precious falcons. Back at Merv, travelers chronicled capturing bandits and handing them over to local governors. Whether those governors enforced justice or turned a blind eye for extra fees remains murky in historical debate. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders, comforted by the night's cool air, even as your mind races. Tomorrow, you'll travel through a narrow pass notorious for bandit hideouts, the so-called Dragon's Throat, where stone pillars resemble snarling beasts. Mainstream sources reference that this choke point saw more than 50 recorded raids in a single decade, prompting emperors to station troops at perilous cost. Historians still debate whether military patrols actually reduced raiding or simply displaced it further along the route. You inhale the cold air, tasting metal and dust, and remind yourself that every step forward is a gamble. The merchant from Samarkand produces a worn deck of cards likely introduced by Mamluk traders and offers to teach you a game called Bouge. You accept, wanting to distract your mind from distant shadows. As you shuffle the deck, the board of the weaver's chess set catches your eye. The night piece chips out a reminder of earlier resilience. You place your bet of a date and lose hard at least until you count the spice he shared. At least your dignity remains mostly intact. Camp settles into uneasy quiet. In the distance, an owl hoots a nocturnal scout, perhaps marking the bandits' retreat. You glance toward the ridge where silhouettes loom like dark phantoms. You remind yourself that this land bred legends of heroic traders who fought off dozens of brigands with nothing but a prayer and a pothook. Whether those tales are true or embellished over countless retellings fuels conversation among modern scholars. You note yet another scholarly debate you could bring up at future dinner parties. You lie back on your rolled blanket gazing upward. The Milky Way spills across the sky like a spilled sugar bowl, ironically precious here, since sugar was once a luxury traded along these routes. You hear the soft rattle of the guide's falcon settling in its hood, the spice merchant snoring already, and the occasional sigh from the young weaver. You close your eyes, pulse still thrumming from adrenaline and relief. In the half-dark, the desert seems to breathe around you alive with unseen eyes. You remind yourself tomorrow's ridges hold both danger and beauty, and only one choice separates survival from tragedy. Bribe, quietly fight, cautiously, or pray fervently. You choose to do all three just in case. You leave the endless dunes behind and begin the climb into the jagged embrace of the mountains, where each step feels more like a bet against gravity than progress. The caravan snakes up a rocky switchback camels replaced by hardy mountain mules, their sure-footed hooves clicking against icy stones. You trudge onward pack, digging into your shoulders as cold air stings every exhalation into visible clouds. Mainstream accounts note that Silk Road caravans cross the Pamir Mountains, the so-called roof of the world, at altitudes above 14,000 feet, where hypoxia was as dangerous as any bandit ambush. Your breath comes in ragged bursts, each inhale a frosty shock that scrapes the lining of your lungs. You tug your scarf up to your nose, tasting nothing but thin air and determination. A fringe rumor claims that some daring traders drank yak butter tea each morning to grease their lungs against altitude sickness, an odd concoction that tasted like liquid oatmeal with a faint barnyard tang. Historians still debate whether this buttered brew genuinely eased breathing or simply served as a morale booster for shivering travelers. The guide motions you forward, pointing out a narrow ledge cut into the mountain's face. You edge along it as if walking a tightrope. One slip could send you tumbling into centuries-old crevices. Below, the valley floor retreats like a vanishing memory of sand replaced by cliffs streaked with snow. You grip the rock wall with gloved hands, recalling how you once cursed frozen camel rains in a camp long ago. Joke one at least, these rocks don't spit at you when you complain. A stray gust rattles your pack straps and fills your ears with a howl that could be a wolf, or just the wind's own rehearsed area. You pause to secure a strap, dropping a leather-tied bundle of dried apricots. They roll toward the abyss. You catch the mid-slide fingers numb, but reflex sharp. You pop one into your mouth, its sticky sweetness a brief sunburst against the chill. Behind you, the spice merchant giggles, though his nose is too red from cold to look jovial. Higher still, snow begins to mingle with dust, frosting your lashes and muting colors to muted grays and whites. You step through patches of frozen mud, each footfall a crunch that echoes in the thin air. A fellow trader, the chess weaver, trails close by. She presses a paw to her cheek, wincing her fingers tingling with frostbite. You slide off your mitten and massage her knuckles, recalling how she once saved you from a camel's rebellious spit. Joke 2, looks like saving lives has its perks. She now demands first dibs on your last slice of hardtack. As you climb, the guide points to a jagged outcropping, where carved stone tablets stand their inscriptions worn by centuries of wind. Mainstream historians record these waymarkers, inscribed in Chinese and Sogdian, serving as beacons for lost travelers. Historians still argue whether they were official imperial wayposts or the work of adventurous pilgrims marking their triumphs. You brush snow off the nearest slab, revealing faded characters that feel like whispers from antiquity. Wind picks up again, sending a swirl of ice crystals that sting your cheeks like tiny needles. You pull your cloak tighter, wishing you'd packed heavier wool for this stretch, rather than that extra jar of fermented fish regret that flares as a second fringe tail. Some caravaneers carried frozen fish to distract themselves during long nights, convinced the alternative was boredom-induced madness. You shrug, deciding that mental health hacks work in mysterious ways. A sudden cheer rises as the caravan crests a ridge, revealing a sapphire glint far below a high-altitude lake, its surface glazed with ice. You stagger to the edge, lungs screaming, and peer down at the shimmering expanse. Mirages of palm trees dance on the surface, but you know better. This is no desert dazzler. You kneel and cup the water in your gloved hands, sipping the coldest liquid you've ever tasted. Your teeth chatter, but your heart soars. The guide explains that this lake once served as a customs checkpoint under the Tang Dynasty, where traders paid tariffs in every conceivable commodity: silk horses, even rare gemstones. Fringe whispers suggest that one bold merchant once paid his dues in live songbirds, setting them free, in protest, a gesture that became local legend. Historians still debate whether Songbird Man ever existed or was invented to entertain tavern crowds back in Chang'an. You stand brushing off ice crystals that cling to your coat. Behind you, the camels, unfortunately reunited further down, look up at the ridge with what you swear is envy in their eyes. You joke 3, maybe next time they'll carry the traders. The caravan presses on, following a narrow ridge that dips, then rises like a giant spine. You concentrate on one foot in front of the other, recalling how you once learned that sheer willpower could override a dozen academic debates. Yet here, your willpower is tested by every frosty breath. As twilight falls, the sky deepens to cobalt. You and your companions shoulder through a final incline, boots crunching in unison. At the summit, you find a makeshift shelter stones stacked into a half wall lined with animal skins against the wind. You collapse inside, pulling off boots to reveal toes so numb you can't feel a thing. The spice merchant passes you a small flask of hot tea, real tea this time, not goat hair fermented, and you cradle it between your hands like a talisman. Under a thin blanket of stars, the mountain peaks loom like silent sentinels. The temperature plunges, and you don every spare layer you have, but still shiver. You share a ration of dried meat with the chess weaver. She mumbles about the strategic advantage of a warm meal, then promptly dozes off mid-chew. You lean back against the stone wall, your head full of distant dunes and Roaring storms now replaced by this bone-deep cold. You close your eyes, listening to the whisper of wind through crevices, the creak of leather, and the guide's soft chant in an ancient tongue. You feel the weight of history in every frosty inhalation, and despite every shiver, a quiet pride blooms. You survived the roof of the world. Yet you know this is merely one chapter. Greater challenges lie ahead in the lowland beyond. With that thought, you let the cold lull you toward an uneasy rest anticipation, blending with exhaustion. You trudge toward a weather-beaten gatehouse perched at the edge of a dusty settlement, where two squat towers connected by a stout wall mark the quarantine checkpoint. A ragged guard thrusts a stamped parchment at you, a mandatory health certificate claiming you and your goods are plague-free. You face pestilence checkpoints where plague fear mixes with official extortion, and you realize surviving disease might be harder than dodging bandits. The air is thick with tension as traders offload crates while scribes dip quills in ink, registering names and sealing wooden tags. Mainstream sources note that some early Silk Road cities like Kashgar and Merv instituted rudimentary health inspections as early as the 10th century to stem the spread of diseases, centuries before European quarantines became formalized. Historians still argue whether these measures genuinely halted outbreaks or merely offered local officials a fresh avenue for graft. Your caravan leader steps forward, purse clenched in sweaty fingers. The guard squints through a narrow slit in his helmet, then demands an extra 10 silver dirhams for sanitation fees. You cough politely, an unfortunate sign in these parts, and try to negotiate. Fringe whispers suggest that some officials actually tested traders by plunging their forearms into boiling goat's milk. If the flesh blistered within moments, you were deemed infected. You shudder at the thought of surrendering half your earnings just to prove you're not a walking biohazard. You tighten your scarf around your neck more to hide your embarrassment than to filter germs. The guard huffs and stamps your document with a flourish that could rival any calligrapher's. You joke that his stamp is more ornate than half the silk patterns you've seen, and he barely cracks a smile. Joke one if only artistic talent could cure a fever. Beyond the gate, a separate tent is pitched for those under observation. Inside, traders sit on low stools wrapped in sooty blankets against the chill. They sip suspicious-looking broth that the town's apothecary brews from bitter herbs and garlic. Sounds more like medieval energy drink than cure. A fringe tale claims these soups were spiked with ground scorpion to test one's intestinal fortitude. If you survived the nausea, you were probably fine. Whether this actually saved lives or simply induced vomiting as a dangerous side effect remains part of scholarly debate. You shuffle forward, clutching your water skin and a satchel of dried figs for comfort. The scribe glances up to note your arrival. His quill feathers a ghostly dance on parchment. You recall hearing that the bubonic plague first clung to Silk Road caravans long before the Black Death devastated Europe in the 14th century, carried by fleas on rats stowed among furs and grain sacks. Historians still argue whether the disease's westward leap was primarily overland or by sea. But here, you pay the price for fear itself. You're herded onto a raised wooden platform where officials measure your pulse and check your tongue for discoloration. You open your mouth grimacing at the strange taste of metal lingering from yesterday's improvised mask. You joke too, at least. This beats being examined by a cobra. Those plague docs did practice some dark arts. The official murmurs in a clipped dialect, his fingers pressing gently into your wrist. You feel awkwardly alive, like the one moment you've never paid rent for, thanks to your voracious explorer spirit. Once cleared, you're funneled into a narrow alley, lined with stalls selling various protective charm strings of garlic tiger teeth pendants and text scrolls inscribed with prayers in Sanskrit. A being hawking vials of fumigating powder whispers that a single pinch can ward off contagion. Fringe rumors insist it was no more effective than throwing sand at fleas, yet traders spritz it on their boots just to feel proactive. You buy a tiny pouch mostly for psychological comfort, and because at 5 dirhams, it's cheaper than a second bribe. Past the alley, the path narrows, and you pass a small hospice where coughing figures lie on wooden pallets. A lean monk tends to them, humming a plaintive chant. Among them, you spot a scholar who once lectured you on paper-making techniques back in Dunhuang, now too frail to care about ink quality. His eyes flicker as you approach. You offer him a date, and he offers a raspy blessing in return. You wonder if he remembers the old debate over whether paper was first invented by court eunuchs or by Taoist alchemists. Joke 3 either way, it saved more books than curses. Your boots click on cobblestones polished by countless feet, and at last you step into sunshine beyond the quarantine zone. The walls loom behind you like silent sentinels, guarding secrets of survival and suffering. You draw a deep breath clean at last, at least until you catch sight of the next checkpoint 50 miles down the road. You pocket your fumigation powder, wondering if optimism counts as a viable defense. You rejoin your caravan, and the spice merchant quips that you look like you've survived an opera house rather than a plague test. The chess weaver sighs, recounting how her pieces clattered in the inspection tent, forcing her to pay an extra dirham to recover them. You laugh, recalling how she once threatened to pawn your travel satchel for a single bishop. Here, in the shadow of disease and red tape, levity is as precious as water. As you resume walking, you feel oddly triumphant. No fever, no fines beyond extortion, and your pockets only slightly lighter. You remind yourself that disease was a constant companion on the Silk Road, measles, smallpox, plague, all spreading silently from oasis to oasis. Historians still argue whether overland routes or maritime connections carried the deadliest waves, but you simply keep moving forward, one careful step at a time. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the plain. You scan the horizon for the next halting place, a cluster of mud brick huts, where you'll spend another night separated from friends by health fences and suspicion. You adjust your pack, savor the crisp evening air, and brace yourself for whatever the next checkpoint demands. Because on this road, survival often depends on a combination of bribes, guile, and a stubborn refusal to cough in the wrong direction. Night descends like a velvet blanket, and you shiver under a bitter sky, freckled with pinpricks of silver. The desert's warmth bleeds away, leaving your bones rattling in protest as you stake out a circling ring of small fires. Camels huddle nearby, groaning softly while the spice merchant fans embers to coax them back to life. Mainstream accounts record that Silk Road caravans often traveled by night to avoid daytime heat, lighting dozens of lanterns to guide their way. But those lamps also invited nocturnal predators. Historians still argue whether ancient traders preferred night travel mainly for cooler temperatures or to evade human threats like bandits. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and glance toward shifting shadows, heart-thumping. A distant howl rips through the stillness. Hyenas, known to stalk caravans after feast fires, attracted by scraps and the scent of fear. Fringe stories claim that some daring merchants strapped dried goat skins soaked in urine to their tents as makeshift hyena repellents. You hope none of your companions volunteered for that particular experiment. You unwrap your goatskin flask and peer inside. At least your water double as a stink bomb if things go south. Joke 1, if only hyenas were as easily scared off by spilled camel dung as they supposedly were by urine-soaked skins. You squat by your own little fire, placing stones around its base to create a pit that traps heat and keeps curious paws at bay. The chess weaver beside you softly arranges her knight and rook on a flat rock, replaying yesterday's loss with deliberate moves. You catch her eye and offer a wry smile. She responds with a half grin so wry it could slice steel. Joke 2. If only you could flip the board on a hyena, you'd distract it long enough to make your escape. Above, the Milky Way spills across the sky like a celestial caravan of its own, caravans of stars, bound for unknown horizons. You remember the guide's chant echoing in the mountain pass and feel the past threading through your muscles. Between crackles of burning wood, you recall that travelers in Gansu once used reflective bronze mirrors at night to signal distant parties, an early SOS, if you will. Historians still debate whether these signals were standardized codes or improvised on the spot. You test the idea by angling a small piece of polished pottery toward your reflection. It gleams faintly, though you doubt it will reach anyone 10 paces away. A sudden rustle in the sand jolts you upright. The camel Bertha shifts beside you, snorting, as if to say, "Really you again?" She kicks at the ground, flinging sand like an impatient dancer. You crouch low, heart hammering, then realize it's only the spice merchant's cloak snagging on a rock. You release a breath you didn't know you were holding. Joke 3. If Bertha knew how jumpy you get, she'd charge you rent for the nightmares. Moments later, the hyena's howls grow bolder, punctuated by the distant bark of a lone fox. You stretch a hand toward your pack and extract a handful of dried dates. You toss one into the darkness, a peace offering or a diversion, you're not sure. The date skips across stones, and for an instant, a hyena's silhouette flickers at the firelight's edge before melting back into gloom. Traders historically tossed crumbs of stale bread to test whether predators would strike at their thick-walled tents. Whether this really saved lives or merely amused bored guards is still a point of contention. You press your back against the canvas windbreak, huddling into your blanket, trying to filter out the chorus of distant calls. The guide, sitting a few paces away, rubs his lantern to keep the wick alight. He mutters something in an old dialect. You catch the word for watch and nod. You remember how he once saved you from a scorpion bite in the gorge, brandishing that lantern like a beacon of hope. That memory steadies you now, despite the cold sweat beads on your brow as anxiety gnaws at your gut. You sip water from your goatskin flask, icy droplets that burn your throat but calm your nerves. A fringed tale drifts through your mind. Some caravans carried live owls to deter hyenas, believing the bird's piercing screech would send predators scurrying. You glance upward, half expecting to see feathers drifting down into the firelight. Instead, only silence greets you. Historians still argue whether such methods were widespread or mere superstitions whispered by desperate travelers. Across the fire, the chess weaver yawns her pieces, still arranged in mid-game. She murmurs that she once lost a bishop to desert bandits and a knight to hyenas, hardly ideal odds. You offer her a glove to warm her fingers, and she accepts it with a nod. In the flickering glow, you notice the fraying seam where you patched her cloak days ago, a call back to the night of the sandstorm when she bandaged your blistered hand with her silk. The bond you share glows brighter than these dying embers. The camp's cook stomps around the perimeter, rattling pots to assert his presence. Occasionally, he brandishes a thin blade and sends scorpions skittering into the darkness. You admire his grim efficiency reinvention born of necessity. Mainstream sources mention that some caravan cooks carried small iron hooks they called scorpion shovels, both utensil and weapon. Whether they were ingenious tools or just more gear to lose in the sand remains debated among historians. You can't help but wonder if you should trade in your trusty staff for one of those hooks. You lean back and let your head rest on your pack. The cold seeps through every layer, but you manage to find comfort in the rhythmic crackle of the fire and the muffled breathing of camels behind you. Nightmares skitter at the edges of your mind, visions of suffocating sandstorms, scorpion pincers, and bandit blades, but you force yourself to breathe. Your pulse slows, synchronized with the slow snorts of sleeping beasts. As the night deepens, the hyena howls fade into the distance. One by one, fires gutter out, leaving only your small circle of warmth. You close your eyes, letting the desert's nocturnal symphony play you toward slumber. Before drifting off, you whisper to yourself, "If I wake, I'll survive until dawn." A final thought lingers. Friendships forged by fear are as enduring as those sealed by silk. And with that, the desert night envelops you completely, inviting dreams as wild and unpredictable as the road you travel. You step into a swirl of voices, scents, and colors as the caravan edges into a sprawling oasis marketplace. Stalls brim with ruby-red pomegranates, bolts of tie-dyed silk, and clay jars of fermented mare's milk, while traders shout in a dozen tongues. You barter in broken Persian, your voice laced with Turkic inflections, hoping your Hezar dinar hits the right note for that shimmering silk. Instead, the vendor laughs and hands you a wooden flute. Courtesy and confusion collide in a hilarious dance. You're stuck between etiquette and outright misunderstanding. By the 8th century, C.E. Samarkand had blossomed into a cosmopolitan hub, its markets legendary for both exotic goods and linguistic gymnastics. Merchants from Chang'an, Baghdad, and Constantinople rubbed shoulders here, exchanging not only wares, but jokes about one another's accents. Historians still argue whether standardized bronze weights issued under the Tang dynasty ever truly unified measurements across distant bazaars, or if each town stubbornly clung to its own scales. You eye the vendor's balances. One pan holds a lump of raw silk. The other jingles with copper dirhams, as uneven as your bargaining skills. You produce a small sack of cardamom pods, your spice merchant companion's specialty, and attempt to negotiate. Be a skier, you blurt, meaning 20 coins, but your accent comes out more like 20 camels. The vendor's eyebrow arches so high it might graze his turban. You backpedal, not camel's coins. He cackles, flips a handful of dirhams into your palm, then tosses a live chicken onto your pack. Gift, he declares. You blink at the squawking bird and realize your mistake, backing off too late, turned a sale into an unexpected poultry purchase. Joke 1. Maybe you'll barter the chicken later for a phrase book that actually works. A few stalls down, the chess weaver squints at a line of bronze mirrors laid out by a Chinese artisan. She haggles expertly, recalling how you once rescued her knight from a sandstorm. Your callback to that gritty night in the gorge still earning you goodwill. The artisan demands 3 yak butter tea pouches for a mirror. She counters with 2 pouches and 1 jar of fermented fish. You cringe, remember that goat hair tea fiasco. But she grins and seals the deal, convinced the mirror's glare will fend off both hyenas and shady merchants. Above the din, the guide intercepts a caravan of Greek-speaking mule drivers. You overhear them discuss their hometown Palmyra and how they carved secret messages in Aramaic on saddle flaps to avoid official snooping. Fringe whispers claim some traders used invisible ink made from date syrup to encode routes, but whether those micro-manuscripts ever survived the desert's heat remains hotly debated among scribes. You imagine discovering a map so faded you need a magnifying glass and a scholarly debate just to read it. Bartering brings you to a textile stall where bolts of embroidered carpet hang like tapestries. The vendor's Arabic blends seamlessly with Sogdian jargon. They measure your desperation and demand a premium. You produce your plague checkpoint fumigation powder pouch, 5 dirhams worth of psychological relief, and dangle it like precious amber. He eyes it warily, but accepts, convinced it will ward off both disease and disputes. You joke too. You might need that powder just to survive bartering here. As you hand over coins, a stray breeze carries the perfume of jasmine blossoms from a nearby Persian apothecary. A small crowd gathers to sniff expensive oils, sandalwood musk, and a curious blend of camel dung distilled into a supposed aphrodisiac. You wrinkle your nose, recalling the crocodile dung sunscreen anecdote, and wonder if this fragrance works any better. Historians still argue whether such animal-based perfumes were status symbols or desperate experiments in an era without deodorant. You lean in, smell it, and decide the ancient Greeks who invented perfume likely had better days. Nearby, a Greek merchant offers you a scroll of papyrus detailing maritime routes, though you're thousands of miles from the sea. He charges a handful of silk ribbons and demands you recite a line of Homer in return. You clear your throat and mumble, "Sing, O Muse," which earns hearty applause more for your bravery than your pronunciation. Joke 3. At least your dramatic recitation beats your bartering skills. While the weaver examines the mirror, You drift toward a pastry stall where a jolly baker hands out Samarkand halva, dipped in honey. You bite into a crumbly square that melts on your tongue sugar, mingling with sesame and rose water. It's a fleeting oasis of sweetness. Traders historically valued such treats as luxury rations. Some caravans even carried miniature ovens. Historians still debate whether these mobile bake shops followed the trade routes or piggybacked on military supply lines. You pocket 2 more pieces, promising yourself you won't barf them up if they're laced with desert grit. Your attention is drawn to a booth draped in crimson velvet, where Tibetan monks offer prayer flags dyed with yak urine, a peculiar fringe ritual meant to bless travelers. You stare at the fluttering banners, unsure whether the blessing or the aroma is more potent. You recall tossing a date to distract hyenas. Now you wonder if prayer flags could distract bandits. Perhaps you should trade a few dates for one of those flags, call it spiritual insurance. The spice merchant rejoins you purse lighter, but spirits high. He shows off his purchase, a set of carved bone compass markers inscribed with zodiac symbols. He explains with no small pride that they'll guide you by the stars when the guide's falcon falls asleep. You examine one tiny constellation's etched so precisely you could get lost in their beauty. You ask if he bartered for those or merely coerced them through jokes about goatskin flask aftertaste. He winks both. You two share a conspiratorial grin, lightning-forged friendship in a cacophonous bazaar. You notice a small wooden crate labeled Silk Road Spam Pickled Stone Fruit. A fringe legend says that bored traders invented this as a prank, canned peaches marinated in vinegar, though few admit to ever tasting it. You lift the lid cautiously, sniff, then slam it shut. Some culinary curiosities are better left untested, you decide. Historians still argue whether such food spread widely or remained isolated hoaxes told around campfires. You make a mental note never to prank your own caravan. Load balanced again, you step away from the stalls, pockets jingling with mismatched coins. The palm-shaded plaza stretches ahead, inviting both commerce and chaos. You settle beside the chess weaver under a woven canopy, and she shows you the reflective bronze mirror, her prize. You catch your own reflection in its polished surface, wind-tousled hair, dust-smudged cloak, and eyes bright with triumph. The marketplace hums around you, a symphony of trade and tongues. In this tangled web of barter, every misunderstanding becomes a story worth retelling by campfire light. As the sun dips, you fold your haggled maps and adjust your pack straps. The guide calls you forward. It's time to move on. You thank each vendor in a patchwork of phrases, some correct, some disastrously wrong, but all delivered with genuine gratitude. Whether your silk is truly woven in Khotan or just a local imitation, you won't know for days. Yet in these cultural tangles, courtesy wrangled by confusion, you find connection, humor, and the fleeting magic that keeps you trudging forward on the Silk Road. You trudge up a packed clay road toward the looming arch of the border gate, its sandstone towers crowned with fluttering banners that snap in the breeze. Beneath the portal, a dozen officials lounge on benches, stamping papers and eyeing arriving caravans with practiced indifference. You kneel before a grim-faced clerk who inspects your manifest, every bolt of silk, every sack of spices tallied in neat columns. Mainstream records tell us that such checkpoints were common at border towns like Tashkent and Khotan by the 8th century CE, ensuring that customs duties flowed into imperial coffers. Historians still argue whether these duties funded vital infrastructure or simply padded bureaucratic pockets. The clerk taps his quill against your ledger, then waves you forward with a flick of his wrist. Handing over half your finest gemstones would be cheaper than this process, but you resolve to play by the rules, at least for now. Fringe rumors suggest that some traders carried hollow jade beads filled with lead to deceive greedy officials, yet few admit to resorting to such deception. You swallow a gulp of water, tasting the grit of dusty roads beneath the veneer of politeness. A joke flickers in your mind. If only the clerk knew how heavy your bribes weighed in real terms. Beyond the main gate lies the innermost courtyard where officials weigh loaded camels on large stone platforms. You guide Bertha onto one, her padded feet clinking against the rough slab as she shifts her weight. A levered beam descends groaning under her bulk, and copper discs clank into baskets to register her load. You remember reading that Tang Dynasty authorities standardized caravan scales to prevent underweighing, a measure aimed at curbing profit gouging, but easily circumvented by savvy packers. Historians still debate whether these reforms truly curbed corruption or merely encouraged more creative smuggling. You lead Bertha off the scale and follow a narrow corridor into a dimly lit warehouse where clerks inspect goods for concealed contraband. You unstrap your satchel and present it with exaggerated compliance, careful to hide the small revolver-shaped tobacco pipe you acquired in a distant market. Fringe lore claims that some caravans smuggled opium encased in hollowed gourds, but whether this was widespread or merely whispered in alleyway gossip remains a topic of scholarly debate. You pat your pipe in its pouch, grateful that you remembered to tuck it beneath a faded cloth. A second official, a portly man with ink-splotched robes, beckons you forward. He demands a demonstration of the pipe's harmlessness, so you light it gingerly, inhaling the rich, earthy aroma. The clerk sniffs and nods approvingly, handing you a stamped wooden token, a permit good for another 100 miles. You blow a smoke ring in his direction and wonder if he'll try one after hours. Joke one, perhaps, the next caravan will carry tax-free clouds for sale. Outside, a low wall with narrow arrow slits surrounds a smaller courtyard where caravan guards patrol with spears and crossbows. You approach the guard captain, a stern woman with a scar across her left cheek. She listens as you recite the name of your destination, Kashgar, and studies your permit token. Mainstream sources confirm that border guards were often drawn from local militias, their loyalty as shifting as the dunes themselves. Historians still argue whether employing locals bolstered security or invited bribery and collusion. After her inspection, she orders a brief ride through the gate's drawbridge. You climb aboard a wooden handcart for a demonstration, the wheels scraping against gravel as clerks observe your camel's gait for signs of larding or hidden compartments. You recall that some traders once padded their packs with wool scraps to throw off official suspicions, an expedient trick said to have worked until cold-eyed inspectors learned to shake each sack. Fringe tales debate whether this test were foolproof or undone by bristling camel hair poking through the seam. The captain dismisses you with a curt nod, and you steer your beasts beneath the massive arch. As you pass, you glimpse a gilded plaque inscribed with an imperial decree trade liberated duties collected. You touch the stone, smiling at the irony that freedom here comes at the tip of a quill and the weight of your wares. A soft breeze lifts the banners above. You joke too. At least the breeze carries no additional taxes. Stepping into the border town proper, paved with cobbles, worn smooth by centuries of hoof and foot traffic, you navigate through winding lanes lined with merchant stalls and scribes' huts. The air is redolent with incense, a curious blend of sandalwood and something faintly metallic, perhaps residue from the checkpoint's oil lamps. You nod at travelers from distant realms, an Uzbek rug dealer, a Persian gem cutter, even a handful of Venetian traders whose fair skin glows in the afternoon sun. Linguistic diversity buzzes around you like bees. You spy the chess weaver waiting by a stall offering fresh fruits and curtsies when she spots you. She hands you a small notebook in which she's recorded the permits and passage dates, a habitual record keeper who jokes that paperwork is her true security blanket. You thank her, sliding the notebook into your inner pocket. It feels more precious than any jewel. You recall her teasing you about your tobacco pipe, and you tease back that she'd pawn the entire caravan for a well-organized ledger. Joke 3 at least, her pages cost less than half your silk. Ahead, a narrow gate leading to the fortified granaries stands open. You pass beneath its arch, noting sacks of grain, stamped with official seals waiting to be weighed for local consumption. A man in faded leather breeches waves you an offering a mug of barley beer brewed from those very stores. You sip the foamy brew grains tickling your teeth and feel warmth spreading through chilled limbs. Traders historically relied on such checkpoints not just for duties, but for communal provisions. Whether these stores mostly fed officials or caravaneers has been a matter of heated, scholarly debate. You heft your pack and collect Bertha's reins. The guide is already ahead, beckoning you toward the road that snakes out of town. You pass under a final arch where incense coils smoke in stone bowls, meant to purify souls leaving the checkpoint. Fringe tales suggest that some officials require departing caravans to sacrifice a small portion of goods as an offering, an extorted ritual rarely admitted in official records. You rub the smoke from your face, letting it clear your thoughts and perhaps absolve your minor acts of smuggling. As you step beyond the granary gate, the fortified walls of the border town recede behind you, replaced by rolling hills dotted with scrub. You glance at your permit token and smirk. It's more reliable than any phrase book or charm. You scan the horizon where a lonely caravanserai silhouette awaits promising rest and new challenges. You shoulder your pack with renewed confidence, knowing that you pass through the gauntlet of officials unscathed this time. The road ahead gleams in the late afternoon sun, a ribbon of dust winding through gentle slopes. You recall the clerk's weary expression and the guard captain's precise nod. Surviving these border gateways demanded more than coin. It required patient performance and a willingness to treat extortion as just another obstacle. And so, stepping onto that dusty trail, you acknowledge that in this land of red tape and stone scales, the only true currency is your adaptability. and resolve. You wake before dawn, fingers stiff from yesterday's cold, and survey your dwindling supplies like a miser counting gold coins. One goatskin flask holds barely 2 sips of water, and half the hardtack rations have been gnawed down to chalky stubs. You ration dwindling food and water desperation, sparking inventive and risky solutions as each mile robs you of both moisture and morale. Mainstream sources note that Silk Road caravans often allotted as little as 1 liter of water per person per day in the desert, with extra reserves tucked away for camels who gulped up to 30 liters each, leaving humans to ration like ascetic monks. Historians still argue whether millet porridge or dried apricot paste was the primary staple for sustenance, but either way, your stomach growls a dismal soundtrack to the sunrise. You slip a cube of stale hardtack into your mouth, minding each crumb as if it were a precious jewel. It tastes like cardboard dipped in chalk, but you chew it with a fervor that would impress any famine-era poet. A joke flits through your mind, at least it's low-calorie. Your emergency kimchi fermenting days are behind you. You cradle your water flask like an ancient relic, turning it over in your hands as if reassessing your life decisions. The spice merchant, who already looks 2 years older than his actual age, taps your shoulder. He's fashioned a makeshift filter from linen and fine sand, claiming it will clean the scantiest puddles into potable water. You raise an eyebrow. Fringe rumors claim that some caravaneers even lace their water with camel dung to mask taint a practice you suspect kills more thirst than pathogens. You stare at him, wondering if you should volunteer to filter first. Joke 1, either that or we invest in desalination. Oh, wait, we're in the desert. As the sun peaks above the eastern dunes, you pour half a finger's width of water into a tin cup and pass it around. Each sip is met with grateful gulps. The chess weaver breaks a piece of hardtack into 3 shareable shards, her gesture more valuable than any feast. You nibble your portion, recalling the night watch's hyena nightmares and the sandstorm's rasping gusts. Those threats paled beside the gnawing emptiness now hollowing your belly. You glance at your camel Bertha, who yawns in lazy solidarity. Fringe tales suggest that desperate traders once chewed dried camel dung as an emergency fluid substitute its moisture-binding properties, supposedly easing thirst for a few extra hours. You wrinkle your nose at the thought, deciding that dehydration might be preferable. Historians still argue whether such practices were genuine survival tactics or simply cautionary campfire stories told to scare greenhorns. Your guide raises a hand, signaling a halt at a rocky outcrop. He taps a metal flask tied to his saddle and offers you a taste of fermented mare's milk, a traditional kumis. It's sour fizzy and leaves your tongue tingling with a metallic tang. But you swallow anyway, savoring warmth more than flavor. Joke 2. You've consumed stranger cocktails at palace parties and paid good dirhams for them. Under the outcrop's scant shade, you hollow out a shallow basin in soft rock, hoping to trap dew overnight. The guide insists that on clear desert mornings, enough moisture condenses to moisten flints for a fire or coax a sip of water, though you suspect this fringe method yields more hope than hydration. No matter you position your linen filter beneath the basin and vow to check it come nightfall. Desperate times call for even more desperate tent-side science. You rummage in your pack for the last of your preserved apricots, their sugary tang, a fleeting oasis. You pop one into your mouth and savor the rush of sweetness flooding your senses. A mainstream account mentions that Sogdian traders often carried dried fruits precisely for this reason, to stave off exhaustion and provide swift calories. Yet rumors swirl that some merchants sold dyed stones painted to look like apricots, a scam still hotly debated among ancient consumer watchdogs. You swallow slowly, praying your bite isn't the counterfeit. By midday, the sun is an unforgiving overseer. You and the weaver wrap scarves over your faces, breathing shallow so as not to lose precious moisture. You shelter beneath the camel's heat shields, woven mats draped over their humps to reflect sunlight and marvel at their adaptability. Historical records indicate that animal handlers sometimes lashed on extra mats, soaked in water, to create evaporative cooling, a technique whose effectiveness historians still argue was genuine engineering marvel, or simply tricky rumor. Your stomach flips as the guide spots a distant haze, an oasis no larger than a wading pool, but undeniably water. A collective cheer rises. You break into a jog boots, kicking up pebble-sized sand. The rest of the caravan lurches after you, thirsty hands outstretched like charmed dancers craving the next beat. You plunge your tin cup into the shallow pool, tasting algae and hope in the same gulp. Water sloshes over your fingers as you scoop another mouthful for the merchant he drinks with closed eyes, mistaking grit for ambrosia. You notice something glinting at the pool's edge, shards of broken pottery and tiny green glass beads, the remnants of a Roman flask fringe. Whispers suggest that travelers lost keepsakes in these very waters, leaving broken relics to warn future caravans of tainted springs. You scoop up a bead and let it roll between your fingers, imagining the stories it could tell if it could speak. Historians still argue whether these relic fragments mark sacred springs or simply discarded trash. Refreshed, you refill your goatskin flasks with trembling hands and patch up the hole in the linen filter. With more linen, your fingers stink of wet sand, but you don't care. You tuck the bead into your pack as a token of fortune, a joke. 3 surfaces, maybe this bead is the world's tiniest travel-sized souvenir. No extra weight allowance required. With water replenished and bellies partially sated, the caravan reshapes into its dusty column. You strap on your pack with renewed vigor, though your boots feel heavier than ever. Every step through compacted sand reminds you that survival here hinges on a mix of frugality, ingenuity, and the occasional dubious folk remedy. The horizon beckons with more dunes, more challenges, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a better supply of hardtack, though your dreams at this point would settle for stale bread. As the sun sinks low, you reflect on how the journey's true test isn't the shifting sands or the howling winds, but the empty pang in your gut and the trickle of water that must stretch until tomorrow. You glance at the guide, his weathered face calm, as if he's performed this daily ritual for a lifetime. You wonder if he ever tires of ration rules or simply learned to cherish each breath as a gift. Ahead lies another stretch of parched earth before the next oasis. You take a last swallow from your flask, tucking it away. The chest weaver adjusts your scarf to shield your neck from the dying heat, a gesture of solidarity born from shared hardship. You smile, acknowledging that even the smallest kindness can ripple into lifeline-level support here. With the desert's last light fading, you settle into the rhythm of trudging one boot, one camel step, one breath at a time, knowing that survival is a blend of stubborn will and creative desperation. And as the twilight cools your blistered skin, you remind yourself that tomorrow you'll repeat the ration ritual with the same cautious hope, because on the Silk Road, the real treasure is making do with less. You stumble into the dawn chill, shoulders tight from yesterday's rationing, only to hear a groan that isn't human. The unmistakable plaint of Bertha, the camel you've come to alternately love and loathe. She plants her front feet like ancient sentinels refusing to advance, and the entire caravan lurches to a halt behind you. You wrestle with a stubborn camel, its balking threatening the entire caravan's fate, and reminding you that sometimes the fiercest obstacles aren't bandits or storms, but the beasts meant to carry you to safety. Mainstream accounts tell us that Bactrian camels, two humped marvels of the Silk Road, could carry up to 600 pounds of goods and survive weeks without water, making them indispensable to traders as early as the 3rd century CE. Historians still argue whether Persian or Chinese traders first domesticated these beasts for long-haul journeys, but there's no debate about Bertha's obstinacy this morning. You tug at her reins, muttering gentle threats that sound like poetry even to your own ears. But she remains unmoved. Fringed tales whisper that camels once formed their own secret guild, rebelling en masse when overworked, forging tunnels beneath dunes to free themselves. You glance at Bertha's humped silhouette and wonder if she's organizing a revolt right now. Joke one, if only she'd invite you to their secret meetings, you could at least bribe them with extra hay instead of questionable fermented snacks. You palm a handful of saffron you salvaged in earlier bribes and hiss, "Think about curry, girl, lots of curry." Bertha's nostrils flare, but she sniffs dismissively as if you're offering dandelions rather than precious spice. You recall the spice merchant's improvised filter from a few days back? If that worked on grimy puddles, maybe it could fix Bertha's mood too. You consider tricking her with a sip of filtered water, but balk at the thought of wasting more of your precious supply. Around you, the caravan's rhythm has broken down. Mules bray camels shift with disgruntled snorts, and the guide strides forward, staff tapping an impatient beat on the sand. He murmurs to the guard captain, who produces a curved knife. No blade for you, it seems. You remind yourself that violence against sacred beasts is frowned upon on these routes. The camel's patience can be as sacred as its fleece. A joke too surfaces maybe, if I shout free goat milk, she'll panic and move. As sunbeams stretch across the valley, you bend down to inspect Bertha's front hoof. A thorn the size of a fingernail protrudes from her pad. You recall the medieval ointment of dung and wine, once applied to camel wounds, an odd remedy described in Tang Dynasty veterinary manuals. Historians still debate whether such concoctions truly promoted healing or merely masked infection until the beast could walk again. You reach for a shard of pottery, hopefully cleaner than matchstick splinters, and gingerly pry out the thorn. Bertha snorts in relief, shifting her weight, but then promptly plants her other foot as if to test your resolve. You squat in the dust and gently massage her swollen pad with a bit of camel fat you've been saving for leather care. Fringe rumors claim that reciting poetry in the camel's native dialect can soothe stubborn humps, but you're no linguist of camel tongues. Instead, you whisper, "You're the Beyoncé of the desert work-it." Bertha flicks an ear, then chews cud thoughtfully. The guide watches with arms crossed, clearly both skeptical and relieved. Minutes pass, like hours. You wipe sweat from your brow and stifle a sneeze as the wind stirs fine sands. A joke 3 bounces in your head. At this pace, we'll reach the next oasis by next fortnight, assuming Bertha doesn't unionize. The spice merchant drapes a soft scarf over Bertha's muzzle, offering the comfort of familiar scent. At last, she shifts one foot forward and then the other. A collective exhale ripples through the caravan. You help hoist yourself back into the saddle muscles, protesting the awkward lift. The guide gives you a curt nod that reads, "Well done, don't get cocky," and you respond with a tight grin. As the line begins to move, you glance down the caravan. The chess weaver steadies her board atop her own camel. The guard captain scowls but loosens her grip on the spear, and even Bertha's companion mounts behind her, flicks a respectful nod to you. For a moment, camaraderie feels as solid as the mountains. As you trot along, the landscape unfurls into sunlit dunes spotted with scrub. You feel Bertha's stride return to the familiar rhythm, a pendulum swing of hump and hoof. Mainstream travelers often time their journeys to avoid midday heat, preferring morning and evening hours when camels were more cooperative, a strategy documented in Song Dynasty travel logs. Historians still argue whether such schedules improved caravan efficiency or merely avoided complaining camels altogether. You promise yourself you'll try scheduling your own complaints outside of noon. The wind warms around you, carrying the scent of distant wildflowers, a rare bloom in these climes. You recall how, on particularly stubborn mornings, caravaneers once carried small mirrors to catch sunlight in camels' eyes and coax them forward. You lift the pottery shard you used earlier, catching a glint of light. Bertha glances at the sparkle, then miraculously takes a determined step. Whether the ancient mirror trick worked or is merely another trading camp legend remains up for debate, but nobody's arguing now. You urge Bertha onward, focusing on each sway of her gait beneath you. The caravan's melody resumes, bells tinkle, beasts grunt, and your own heartbeat finds a steady tempo. You feel the weight of your pack settle differently now. The sting of yesterday's thirst softened by relief, the ache of yesterday's stone wall replaced by motion. The world flows beneath you like a living tapestry, shifting dunes, distant mountains, and that solitary bead you tucked away from the oasis, spring. Ahead, the outline of a shallow wadi appears, a channel carved by seasonal floods green with resilient grasses. The guide warns you to proceed with caution. These depressions can hide sinkholes or venomous snakes coiled in the underbrush. A fringe story claims that some travelers once used spinning tops tied to strings to detect loose sands before stepping, a cautious method historians question for its practicality. You laugh softly, no top yet, but your gut tells you this wadi is safe enough for a brief halt. You slide from Bertha's back earth, greeting your boots as though welcoming an old friend. You pat her neck in gratitude, whispering a promise to carry extra dates next time. Bertha snorts, tossing her head as if to say, "Just keep the thorn removals coming." You unleash a victorious grin. She's a tough companion, but survivors need companions who push back. As the caravan pauses to water the mules and camels in the wadi's shallow pool, you retrieve your goatskin flask and fill it with fresh water. Each gulp tastes of partnership and persistence. The chess weaver joins you, offering a midday snack of halva crumbs, and trading a knowing look. Your shared triumph over Bertha's rebellion cements a deeper bond. The spice merchant grins and brandishes a cinnamon stick as a miniature scepter. The guard captain finally cracks a smile when Bertha kneels to drink. In that moment, you realize the animal's rebellion taught you more about resilience than any map ever could. You refill your flask yet again, mindful of tomorrow's ration. The guide marks the day's distance on his scroll, barely 18 miles, but everyone earned. You offer him a respectful nod. He returns it, fingers still stained with ink from permits and declarations. You recall the lemongrass tonics you might have carried, but here simple water and a camel's cooperation are luxury enough. As the sun climbs toward its zenith, you remount Bertha's gait, smooth beneath you. The caravan resumes its forward crawl, each creature and person in rhythm once more. You tuck the tiny green bead into your palm, as if drawing strength from its history. Far behind you, the thorn lay abandoned in the sand, a small victory, buried at the foot of shifting dunes. You trudge on every step, a testament to patience, ingenuity, and the peculiar camaraderie between human and beast. You survive the animal rebellion, yet another story to share by campfire light, another callback for future doubts. And as the Silk Road stretches endlessly before you, you know that even the most stubborn humps can be coaxed into motion with a little care, humor, and a judicious application of camel fat. You march beneath a blistering sun that bakes the sand into a shimmering canvas. And on the horizon, you glimpse the glint of water, an inviting pool framed by palm trees. Your heart leaps. You abandon cautious strides and sprint forward, only to find nothing but heat waves dancing on barren dunes. You chase phantom oases in the heat haze, mind and body, teetering on collapse as each mirage dissolves into dust. Mainstream travelogues from 10th century pilgrims describe mirages so convincing that entire caravans altered course toward promised springs, only to discover baked mud and broken pottery. Historians still debate whether these reports reflect deliberate exaggeration for dramatic effect or genuine optic phenomena caused by temperature inversions over the desert surface. You shield your eyes and recall that shimmering air can bend light like a lens, transforming distant dunes into watery illusions. Your throat rasps as you gulp what little water remains, the tiny bead from that last oasis rattling against your ribs like a mocking metronome. You swallow tasting dust and wonder if the bead, once a token of fortune, now heralds cruel tricks of perception. A joke crosses your mind. If only mirages dispensed water instead of teasing shadows. As you trudge after the vanishing oasis, Bertha plods beside you with a resigned groan, her own hump appearing as a distant mirage of hills. You grip your pottery shard mirror and angle it downward, hoping its faint reflection might pierce the heat haze. Fringe whispers claim that some traders carried polished bronze discs to create sunspots that snapped mirages into focus, though few practical travelers ever admitted success using them. You raise the shard, but the glare only dances away, playing hide-and-seek with your sanity. You laugh bitterly. At least this is a free optical experiment. Your guide calls a halt at a rise of golden sand that seems to ripple like water. You crest the dune and stare at what appears to be a shallow lagoon with gentle ripples lapping a sandy bank. Your legs tremble with relief as you scramble down, only to have the surface crackle under your touch salt crystals sparkling where liquid should be. A scholar's debate echoes in your mind. Did ancient scribes mistake salt flats for dry lake beds? Or did they simply prefer a good story to dusty plain? Historians still argue whether descriptions of blue lakes were poetic license or eyewitness error. You slump beside the hollow, gripping your knees as sweat beads on your forehead. Dunes like molten gold cast long shadows, and you recall the spice merchant's filter, now stuffed with sand. You wonder if he'd trade you a sip of kumis for a chance to test this oasis. A joke forms barter, half your rations for the desert equivalent of liquid mirage. Ahead, the horizon shimmers again, this time bordered by groves of date palms that sway in a phantom breeze. You push Bertha forward, willing her to break into a trot, but she hesitates, as if pitying your optimism. You pat her neck, whispering encouragement in camel terms. "You got this, girl," and she steps forward, kicking up sand that blurs into waves below. The palms recede, the mirage beckons and retreats. You grit your teeth, mentally replaying the reflective pottery trick, then recall the bead's tiny promise of reality. A fringed legend drifts from someone's memory. Caravans once left small tokens, coins, or beads at mirage sites, betting that if water truly appeared, fortune would follow. You dig into your pack and drop that green bead into the sandy hollow, a silent offering to desert spirits. You rise, dusting your hands, and let fate decide. Whether this ritual held any power remains hotly debated among modern scholars, but the gesture steadies your heart. You resume trudging, each footstep sinking into the scorched dunes. Your clothing clings damply to your skin from sweat, and your lips crack. You recall how the chess weaver once coaxed you to slow your pace with a story of a lost caravan that chased a rainbow-like mirage into quicksand. Best to see with your feet grounded, she'd warned. You chuckle softly, if only I'd packed quicksand boots. By mid-afternoon, your shadow shrinks beneath you, and you spot what looks like the outline of a brook cutting through the sand. You hurry, then skid to a halt, when you encounter only a dry wash, parched gravel, littered with brittle bones of desert rodents. You pick up a tiny jawbone and study its bleached surface, imagining the hyena that left it. Joke 3. If animals get mirages too, no wonder caravans face competition for water. You press on until the guide raises his hand, pointing to a cluster of date palms in the distance, this time real. Your heart hammers as you edge closer. The palms' green fronds are unmistakable, against the horizon's monotony. With each step, your hope grows only to see the trees shimmer and blur at the last moment. You swallow a groan, remembering how you once hissed encouragement to Bertha, only to find more sand. Your throat roars and you pause under an imaginary palm, closing your eyes. You inhale through your nose, tasting air that feels cooler, real, or imagined, you can't tell. When you open your eyes, the palms have vanished. You stagger on, knees wobbling, and catch yourself on the pottery shard. You cradle it, whispering an apology for overworking that optical prop. Finally, just as your vision doubles with exhaustion, you crest a low ridge, and the mirage dissolves into truth, a pond, glinting blue in the sun, fringed by slender palms and reeds. Your blood sings as you stumble forward, seizing a cup of cool water that tastes of life itself. The guide gives you a proud nod. The chess weaver offers a steadying hand, her night piece tucked in her satchel, replaced here by a more precious liquid. You kneel at the water's edge, cupping your hands to drink deeply, water spilling over and into your boots. The oasis is small, but real, a reward for your stubborn persistence. As you refill every flask, you consider the gift your bead may have earned. Maybe fortune does favor the bold, or maybe this oasis lies on an ancient spring long forgotten. Historians still argue how many true desert springs exist beneath the dunes, and how many are mere illusions born of longing. You lean back against a palm trunk, letting the cool shade ease your sunburned skin. Bertha kneels beside you, drinking with gentle sips as if cautious of this rare bounty. A group of palm squirrels chatters above, eyeing you like scandalized overlords. You gather a handful of fallen dates, sweet, chewy sustenance you swallow gratefully. In this moment, you understand that mirages test more than physical endurance. They probe your mind's capacity for hope amid despair. You tuck the tiny green bead into your pocket as a talisman that even in the harshest illusions, truth can prevail. Rising with renewed strength, you strap on your pack and step back onto the path, water heavy in your flask, and resolve light in your heart. With mirages behind you and reality in your hands, you and the caravan press onward, every thirst quenched, every doubt moderated by perseverance, ready for the next desert trial that awaits beyond the oasis. You guide Bertha toward the swollen riverbank where currents churn like restless spirits eager to claim another traveler. The late spring snowmelt from distant mountains has turned this gentle tributary into a roaring torrent, its pale green waters foaming as they surge around submerged boulders. You ford treacherous waters, cargo soaked and morale nearly washed away, and realize that river crossings can be far more perilous than any sandstorm. Mainstream accounts record that Silk Road caravans often relied on flat-bottomed rafts or simple ferries made of bundled reeds to cross rivers like the Amu Darya and Oxus, with local boatmen charging steep tolls for passage. Historians still argue whether these makeshift vessels reduced drownings or simply shifted risk onto overworked crewmen. You tighten your grip on the lead camel's bridle, adjusting your footing on slippery stones as water laps at your ankles. You clamber onto a squat wooden raft strapped together with leather thongs passing your pack forward to the boatman whose grin cracks through his mud-splattered beard. A fringe rumor insists that some daring merchants once tethered live goats beneath the rafts, believing their frantic bleats would deter hungry crocodiles lurking downstream, though few practical travelers ever admitted to such a macabre experiment. You glance into the murky water, half expecting fins, and joke one, if goats or crocodile bait, I'll stick to saffron smuggling. The boat jolts as it pushes off the shore. You step onto the wobbling deck boots, squelching as you search for purchase. The guide passes you a coil of rope and instructs you to loop it under your cargo bundles just in case. You obey, securing your precious silk bolts and spice sacks. As the ferryman poles you into the current, you recall the chess weaver's commentary. Never trust a river that smiles in spring. You nod, her insight is sharper than any pole's tip. Midstream, a sudden gust whistles across the river, rocking the raft and sending a spray of icy water over your pack. Your satchel, incompetent against waterproofing, absorbs half a liter in seconds. You curse beneath your breath, patting your soggy maps. A joke, too, surfaces. At least I'd planned to buy extra maps. If only I could read them when damp. The boatman shouts encouragement in Uzbek, his voice swallowed by rushing water. You peer into the depths, spotting underwater currents, swirling against protruding rocks like giant aquatic whirlpools. The guide warns you to shift weight aft. Too much forward, Lynn, could swamp the vessel. You reposition yourself, boots sliding on slick wood, and feel the raft list precariously before straightening. The chess weaver steadies a sack of dried fruits, her careful fingers recalling how she once retrieved your chest night mid-sandstorm. That steady calm now seems almost mystical. As you near the center, the current picks up speed. The ferryman plants his pole downstream and braces muscles taut as bowstrings. The water's roar makes conversation impossible. Only gestures pass between you and the guide. You muster a grin and nod, offering a thumbs up, an anachronistic gesture that earns a baffled chuckle from the boatman. A joke 3, maybe thumbs up, is universal after all. Suddenly, the pole strikes a submerged branch. The raft jolts, and you stagger, nearly toppling overboard. A chill of panic shoots through you as you grasp a support beam. You imagine yourself swept away, swallowed by frothing rapids, a silent victim lost to history. But the guide's firm hand steadies your elbow, and you remind yourself you've endured worse sandstorms that felt like being inside a blender bandit ambushes that demanded bribes instead of bullets, and near starvation thirst that tested every ration. This river crossing is just another trial. Mainstream narratives note that despite precautions, river accidents remained a leading cause of caravan fatalities, prompting some rulers to build stone bridges at strategic choke points. Historians still debate whether those early bridges were sturdy enough to support laden camels, or if they collapsed under the first monsoon swell. You scan the opposite bank for the faint outlines of an old bridge's piers, but see only tangled shrubs and eroded banks. The raft shudders as it hits deeper water. The ferryman thrusts his pole with a grunt and slows your drift. You feel the current's full force tug at your cargo bags, sway bells clatter, and you wonder if you'll ever dry your boots. You lean in into the struggle boots carving into wooden grooves and brace against another spray of ice-cold water. A second fringe rumor drifts to mind. Some merchants once greased their packages with animal fat, believing it would repel water. You pat your satchel, its seal long since surrendered, and vow never to trust greasy rumors. After what feels like an eternity of bailing and balancing, you reach the far shore. The ferryman gives a theatrical flourish, planting his pole and steering you toward shallows. Mushy reeds scrape your shins as you disembark, and Bertha plops down with a grateful grunt. You step onto firm ground, tasting freedom and mud in the same breath. You shake out your boots, sending rivulets of murky water cascading onto the bank. The guide supervises unloading. You haul your sodden goods up the embankment. Camels drink from a dull brown pool left by receding waters, and you join them, splashing handfuls across your face. The cold relief sharpens your sense of sandstorms, and bandit scares are distant memories compared to the sting of river water in nostrils. You shiver and laugh. Cold has never felt so invigorating. Carts filled with fresh hay appear waiting to replace muddy sacks, and you realize your cargo is being transferred onto dry mounts. The chest weaver offers you a dry cloth, one of the few unsoiled by moisture, and you gratefully wipe your face. You reflect on the miracle of cotton's absorbency, a mainstream quality admired by travelers since as early as the Tang dynasty, though historians still debate how early Chinese looms mastered fine thread without industrial tools. As the caravan reforms its line, you notice tracks on the bank, the footprints of previous crossings now half erased by rushing water. You kneel to inspect them, imagining the weary trader who passed this way centuries ago, pressing toes into the mud with the same caution you just displayed. That silent connection across time moves you more than any exotic good you've carried. The guide taps your shoulder and points toward a carved stone marker set into the bank, a boundary stone inscribed with faded characters marking a regional border. Mainstream travelers reference these markers to confirm distance traveled, though historians still argue whether they served more as territorial claims or practical waypoints. You trace the worn glyphs with your fingertip, feeling the cool stone under the sun's warming rays. With cargo reloaded and morale restored, you fall into the procession boots, slapping damp earth in time with camel hooves. The river retreat now lies behind you, replaced by rolling grasslands dotted with low scrub. You take a deep breath, breathing in wildflowers instead of cold spray, and allow the sensation to wash over you like a benediction. You cast one last glance back at the water, a jade ribbon winding through golden banks, and realize you crossed not just a river, but a line between fear and triumph. Each soaked item, each gulp of muddy water, and each precarious balance test etched itself into your memory. Yet here you stand, still intact, still moving forward. The sun climbs higher as the caravan picks up speed, stepping away from the river's roar toward quieter plains. You pat Bertha's neck, whispering gratitude for her steady hooves, and she snorts as if to say, "Don't make me relive that again." You laugh, grip your goods, and trudge on, knowing that dry land awaits, but also that the next crossing may be just beyond the horizon. You wind through a narrow saddle between two craggy ridges, the air crackling with more than static. The political climate here is as turbulent as the skies above. Once a simple trade route, this pass has become a powder keg of imperial rivalries where treaties signed in distant courts can snap like brittle parchment at any moment. You navigate imperial rivalries that close roads when treaties unravel at midnight, and you realize that a soldier's sword needn't swing to sever your path. Bureaucratic edicts can be just as lethal. Mainstream chronicles record that during the 9th century, the Tang dynasty and various Central Asian khanates frequently revoked and reinstated trading privileges, turning thriving way stations into ghost towns overnight. Historians still argue whether these policy shifts were driven by genuine security concerns or simply the whims of capricious rulers seeking additional revenue. You recall the stamped permits you paid for last week and feel a familiar knot in your stomach. Any misprint or missing seal could strand you for months. As you trudge onward, you notice a patrol of mounted troops on the ridge ahead, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. They bear the banner of a rival khanate, distinctive onyx horns on a blood-red field. The sight evokes a fringe rumor that some commanders once branded captured traders with hot irons bearing the imperial crest, a gruesome warning to others. Whether this practice was widespread or mere battlefield legend remains a topic of heated, scholarly debate. Joke one, at least, branded goods rarely get mistaken at customs. You duck behind a boulder alongside the guide who taps your arm and points to a narrow goat trail weaving between soldiers. You debate whether to risk the flank or wait for a safer opportunity. The spice merchant peers through a gap, muttering that these soldiers never tip their helms in hospitality. You consider tossing them a token, perhaps a jar of camel dung perfume to clear the way, but ultimately decide discretion is the better part of valor. Joke 2. If only I'd packed more odoriferous wares. The guide signals you to follow in single-file boots, whispering against dry rock. You remember the Wadi Oasis, where you quenched your thirst, contrast that relief with the parched handshake you'll likely receive here. As you slip past, one soldier glances down at your dust-caked boots, then at your permit. A bead of sweat trickles down your brow. If he questions your papers, you'll need more than apologies. You push forward, steeling yourself a confrontation. Midway through the pass, a horn clangs an official signal in rarefied circumstances. The soldiers fan out, blocking the trail. You halt, heart hammering, and the lead rider dismounts, black plume swaying. He demands to see your sealed directives. You present your token with as much confidence as you can muster, recalling the portly clerk's ornate stamp back in Tashkent. The soldier examines the seal, narrows his eyes, then breaks into a grin. Well, well, he says you're clear for now. You exhale relief, flooding your veins like fresh water after a stretch of rationed sips. A slap on your shoulder nearly knocks you off balance. Joke 3, perhaps. Next time, I'll carry a second seal just in case. As you resume your march, the guide whispers that those troops patrol at the Khan's pleasure, enforcing whatever treaties he chooses on any given day. Fringe sources claim some soldiers carried empty scroll tubes to force traders to buy new documents on the spot, a crafty and corrupt side hustle. Historians still debate how pervasive this extortion was and whether central authorities ever punished such abuses. Beyond the patrol point, the landscape shifts, as if in response to the political churn signs of abandoned fortresses perched atop cliffs, their timbers rotted and walls half collapsed. You dismount to inspect crumbling watchtowers etched with faded inscriptions proclaiming loyalty to emperors no longer remembered. Mainstream accounts mention that many such forts were built in a frenzy of competition during the 11th century, but fell into disuse when borders stabilized or shifted away. Whether neglect or deliberate demolition doomed them is still argued by archaeologists. You chuckle at the irony these relics once bristled with banners and archers. Now they're home only to kites and lichen. You tap your pack and murmur, nothing like a little political change to clear real estate. You picture the chess weaver's strategic mind mapping these ruins. Like a giant game board, she'd love to draft their moves in her notebook. Ahead, you spot new signposts, interpretive stones carved under recent decrees listing tariffs and tribute rates. The numbers clash with those in your fading manifest. You pause to compare. Changing dues can swallow an entire caravan's profit before the day is out. You adjust your purse accordingly, relocating coins from belt to secret pouch. Some hats and bald ones better left unshared. Passing the signposts, you traverse a narrow shelf etched into the cliff, the drop below, yawning like an accusation. A stray scroll flutters from your satchel, revealing a treaty excerpt written in elegant calligraphy. The breeze lifts it, and you snatch it back, grateful no soldier spotted your breach. You secure it inside a goat leather wrap, promising yourself to debate treaty clauses only after campfire and cold rations. You recall scholars wrangling over whether such treaties were binding among nomadic confederations or mere formalities. You decide such theorizing is best left to those with full bellies. As the path levels into a plateau, your guide gestures toward smoke rising in the distance. A settlement hovers at the edge of view. This will be your next respite, or possibly another bureaucratic gauntlet. You take a deep breath, tasting dust and fear, but also a spark of anticipation. The political storms may shift without warning, but you've learned to read the signs, the banners, the ruins, the toll lists, and adapt. You clamber back onto Bertha, whose steady gait seems ironically immune to political upheaval. You pat her neck, whispering appreciation for her indifference to human squabbles. The caravan lengthens behind you, packs jostling in time with camel bells. With each step forward, you embrace the unpredictable churn of empires, knowing that survival often depends on forging ahead while the world around you quakes with shifting allegiances. You crest a final rise to see the settlement's walls whitewashed and gleaming beacon in the fading light. Beyond them lies not just shelter, but the chance to negotiate new permits, bribe fresh officials, and share stories of the pass's perils. You raise a hand in thanks to the ridge's ghostly watchtowers, then settle into the descent, ready for another chapter in this ever-changing political drama of the Silk Road. You trudge over the final ridge, the late afternoon sun slanting across the dusty sprawl of the border town's market, and wonder if home still feels like home after 4,000 miles of shifting sands and broken promises. The narrow streets teem with merchants unraveling bolts of carpet potters, shaping clay into ornate lanterns, and scribes stamping ledgers with furious precision. Mainstream travelers note that border towns like Kashgar served as cultural crucibles where East met West in kaleidoscopic flourish, a nexus of language, religion, and commerce by the 9th century CE. Historians still argue whether Kashgar's rise was driven more by imperial patronage or by grassroots Sogdian initiative. Your boots crunch over spilled millet and strayed dates as you weave between stalls. A spice vendor offers you a handful of crushed safflower petals bright as embers, and you remember how a single box of saffron once bought safe passage past bandits. Fringe whispers insist that some traders sold fake safflower, dyed with beetroot juice to cut costs, a deception uncovered only when the saffron turned soup pink. You smile, knowing some lessons stick harder than any dye. Joke one at least, pink soup makes a memorable travel souvenir. You pause at a leatherworker's stall to inspect finely tooled pouches, an artisan's flourish that would fetch double in Dun Huang. You recall how the guide once stitched your torn satchel by firelight with camel hair sinew, a makeshift repair that lasted weeks. He'd argued that necessity breeds craftsmanship. You conceded that he might have been on to something. You teased the vendor. Does this come with a lifetime guarantee or just bandit proofing? He laughs, offering you a discount on bandit-proof stitching. The air shimmers with the scent of frying dough as a pastry cart wheels past, dispensing sesame-studded flatbreads that crackle in your fingers. Mainstream records describe Kashgar's flatbread naan so legendary that envoys petitioned imperial kitchens to replicate the recipe. Historians still debate whether the original tangy leaven or later yeast variants were the true secret. You bite into a warm wedge crumbs tumbling into your lap and marvel at how simple sustenance can taste like victory. Fringe gossip claims that some cooks soaked their dough in fermented camel milk overnight, an acquired taste that few modern palates endure. You dare a sip of water to chase the flavor. Joke 2. Nothing says welcome home like slightly sour camel milk bread. As twilight deepens, lanterns ignite in a slow wave, casting mottled shadows across mud brick walls. You cross a wooden bridge spanning a trickle of a stream, its water clearer than any you've seen since the high mountain passes. Mainstream builders constructed such bridges to channel meltwater into town cisterns, evidence of advanced urban planning by the Tang administration. Historians still argue whether these engineering feats were local innovations or imports from Central Asian city-states. Beneath your feet, the planks creak, and you smile, every creak a reminder that stability is often an illusion. You enter an alley where musicians tune stringed lutes, dutar, and rebab, preparing for evening performances. The gentle chords drift through open windows, a melody that threads memories of campfire chants and starlit harmonies. Fringe lore suggests that Silk Road minstrels carried small flutes carved from bamboo, whose reedy timbre could supposedly ward off evil spirits. You hum along quietly, letting the music soften your calloused resolve. A crowd gathers at a scribe's booth, where young men queue to have their travel permits extended. You join the line, fingers tapping against the faded leather of your dossier. The clerk glances at your stamped token, then at the dozen new fees listed in crimson ink. You brace yourself ready to negotiate with the same tact used when bribing bandits. You produce a small drawing and impromptu sketch of Bertha with an apologetic expression and offer it as a whimsical tax reduction. The clerk peeks at the sketch, snorts, and waves you through. You nod in victory. Humor can sometimes cut through red tape better than coin. Two boys dart past you, yelling about a stray goat loose in the market square. You recall how the first campfire of this journey had a goat too, its bleat echoing under starry skies. You watch it slip between stalls, evading capture, a callback to that inaugural night when you wondered if any living creature besides the desert itself could outlast you. The goat escapes through an archway, unclaimed freedom in the labyrinth of commerce. Your camel Bertha, reunited with her rightful saddle, ambles beside you like a trusted friend. You pat her flank, whispering thanks for every stubborn halt and every hard-won step. You remember prying a thorn from her hoof on a frosty slope, coaxing her through a thunderous storm, and cajoling her past mirages. Her steady presence reminds you that home can be found in companions, not just destinations. At the market's edge, you spot the familiar silhouette of the weaver and the spice merchant sharing a stall, trading stories while arranging silk and spices like fine art. You approach, and they rise to greet you. She offers a cup of pomegranate wine, a local specialty fermented from desert orchards reddened as sunset. Mainstream vintners credit Kashgar's microclimate for producing such fruit, though historians debate whether monastic orchards or nomadic settlers first cultivated pomegranates here. You raise your cup in a toast to survival, to camaraderie, to countless miles of uncertainty. You sip the wine, its tart sweetness sliding down your throat with comforting warmth. A fringe rumor insists that some vintners aged wine in camel bone casks to impart depth, a practice so rare it's spoken of only in hushed tones. You let the possibility linger, savoring both flavor and myth. Joke 3. Who knew bone broth could double as a sommelier's secret? Night fully envelops the market, and you step away from the bustle toward a low-roofed inn illuminated by a single flickering lantern. The innkeeper, his face creased by 1,000 sunrises, beckons you inside. You hand over a handful of coins and slip through the door, the warmth and camaraderie beckoning you like a long-lost lullaby. You wonder if home truly lies in brick and mortar, or in the ever-moving tapestry of faces and places you've woven along the Silk Road. You pause by the doorway, letting the inn's lamplight wash over you. Despite every hazard, storms, bandits, illness, animal rebellions, mirages, raging rivers, bureaucratic strife, you stand intact. The road behind you stretches unbroken in memory. The road ahead whispers of yet more adventures. For now, you choose rest. You turn toward the hearth's glow, ready to trade dusty boots for softer slippers. And in doing so, find the very essence of home, the ability to pause, reflect, and find solace in the journey's end. At last, the clamor of the Silk Road recedes into hush, and you rest within walls that breathe warmth instead of wind. Your boots caked with sand and river silt lie silent by the hearth, as your limbs dissolve into the inn's gentle embrace. You taste the smooth tang of pomegranate wine lingering on your tongue and feel the hum of laughter drifting through low beams and lantern-lit corridors. Each breath deepens, unhurried, your chest rising and falling like the soft dunes at sunset. Each inhale a quiet reminder of resilience. Outside, the night breeze carries a lullaby of distant camel bells and far-off lanterns, a melody woven by travelers who came before. You close your eyes, allowing that harmony to wash over you, smoothing the rough edges of sandstorms and midnight howls. The memories of thorny footholds, mirage chasing in, bureaucratic gambits drift together like pages in an ancient manuscript, each story a delicate leaf in the ledger of your nights on the road. No longer do you trudge through dust or clutch rationed water. Instead, you sink into plush cushions, your mind adrift on a calm sea of remembrance. The scent of jasmine from the courtyard garden rises faintly, mingling with smoky incense to cradle you in comfort. You inhale, tasting both closure and possibility, knowing tomorrow the road will beckon once more. But for now, you succumb to this pause where every creak of floorboard feels like a heartbeat, every flicker of flame a whispered promise of renewal. The edges of wakefulness blur into soft reverie as drowsiness enfolds you. The inn's gentle murmur becomes a lullaby, and you drift beyond the threshold of dreams with one final steady thought: you made it through. And tomorrow the story continues. Good night.